ولساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
How many of you attend Dr. Murmur's class? One, two, three, just a few. Okay. How many of you have ever sat in or attended a Tafseer class or a class on the meanings of the Quran? Still just a few. Okay. This class is called the Quranic Way, and he gave it that title because the Prophet ﷺ referred to us as travelers. And so every traveler has to be on their way. And there are a lot of ways that are in the world. There's the liberal way, conservative way, there's the right way, the wrong way, a lot of different ways. But particularly in this class, we want to talk about the Quran way, or the Quranic way. And the Quran has a particular mode of instruction for us travelers. And it highlights certain themes, certain concepts. And it provides certain instructions, and it has a particular concept of the human being in mind. What's very interesting is I did research on the terms for the entire Quran is about humanity. It's about the human being. If you look at the terms in the Quran for human beings, we first find terms that are just basically descriptions, sifat. So we find terms like muslimun, right? Mu'minun, believers. We find terms like kafirun, disbelievers. Munafiqun, hypocrites. We find adjectives. But then we find actual names, like insan, the human being. We find names, and other names as well, like Beni Adam, child of Adam. We find names like Nas, humanity. Ins, human. Unas, humans, human beings. So we find different terms for human beings. Why is that? Why does the Quran provide so many different terms for one type of entity? We find that the Quran in the Meccan period has a particular concept of the human being, that the human being has certain characteristics. We find in the Medinan part of the Quran something a little similar. Then we also find that when the Quran addresses the human beings, it addresses the human beings in one way when it refers to insan. For example, any word, if you were to do a survey of the Quran, and you were to take the word insan, and you were to look at the context of that word, what kind of verses describe the insan, you would find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a particular understanding of how the insan acts, of what the insan is. And so if you were to define what the human being is according to all of the verses that talk about insan, you would find that, oh my goodness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala views the human being in kind of a very pessimistic way. The insan in the Quran is just da'if, weak. The insan in the Quran is one who is kafura, one who rejects blessings and is ungrateful. The insan is stingy. The insan does not know their Lord. The insan is ungrateful. All of these negative, pejorative attributes about the insan. When we look at another term, Bani Adam, the human being, as a child of Adam, we find a radically different notion of the human being. Bani Adam, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا Bani Adam. We've honored Bani Adam. Bani Adam is dignified. Oh, Bani Adam, don't be deluded by shaitan. Remember, Bani Adam, when we took this covenant from you? Remember what you're supposed to do, Bani Adam, and if you do this, you'll be rewarded. Very different references, very different concepts, very different understanding and a different tone when it comes to Bani Adam. When it comes to insan, we're talking about a redheaded stepchild. Very, very different component. So, are we insan or are we Bani Adam? Somebody looking at the Quran, looking at these terms in the Quran, how Allah Ta'ala uses them, would be confused. We've got two terms from human beings and two completely different perspectives about whether this type of creation is good or bad. Well, the answer is, well, we're both. We have insan type tendencies, and then we have Bani Adam type tendencies. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He addresses us as insan, He's addressing us in one kind of mode because the expectation is different. When He addresses us as Bani Adam, it's completely different because the expectation is different. The tone is different. So sometimes in the Quran, we get differences based upon Meccan and Medinan chapters. Sometimes we get differences based upon two different terms that mean the same thing, but that are treated very differently. Sometimes in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes His tone in a different way. Sometimes He's talking about the Prophet, and He's talking about the Prophet, and He's talking about the Prophet, and then He talks to the Prophet. In other words, sometimes He takes the position of sort of what's called an omniscient narrator. He's talking about an event, and then all of a sudden He switches into the person, into the event itself, and addresses the person who's being spoken to, the interlocutor, the listener. Sometimes He's speaking about Himself. Worship me, obey me, you are my servant. Know that there's no God except Him. SubhanAllah. No God except Him, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking. And we've created you. Don't disobey us. How could we be people of Tawheed when Allah Ta'ala speaks of Himself in the plural? How is this possible? What does the plural mean when Allah Ta'ala is saying that we created you? There is no God but us. I am your Lord. So there Allah Ta'ala changes tones. What does that mean? How are we supposed to read that? And what does that mean in terms of how we digest the Quran, how we take it in? So this is beyond, there's a surface reading of the Quran where you read what the Quran is saying at the linguistic level. And then there's a deeper meaning, deeper reading of the Quran where you see what the Quran is saying when it's compared to other parts of itself. And you start taking in the tone of the Quran, not just the words. Your mother or your parents tell you, come here. So you understand that they said, come here. But if they take it up a notch and they change their voice and they say, come here. Right? My mother, when she got upset sometimes with me, she would talk with her teeth closed, and she would like take on this tone as if she was really stressed. And I knew when my mother's teeth closed and she spoke, she was serious. Come here. That means I better come there. My grandmother would just start talking high. Her voice would raise. The tone would elevate. My dad, he would start talking soft. Boy, if I tell you one last time, his voice, when he got upset, his voice would drop. And that's when I knew it was serious. My dad didn't yell. My dad would tell me, if you yell, he said, son, if you raise your voice, people close their ears. But when you start talking low, then people listen. So I knew when he started talking low, that meant he was upset. I had to listen. So the tone sends a message, as much as the words send messages. The Quran was revealed in tones as well. There are tones that are there. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells people, for example, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell the Prophet Muhammad about a certain people, leave him alone. Just leave him alone. And then he'll tell people when he's addressing to that group of wrongdoers, do what you wish. Do what you wish. Now, is that a general acceptance and permission? What if you're talking to your mom and your dad and they say, you know what? Okay, go ahead. Do what you want. Do you have your parents' permission? I don't think so. The tone conveys the opposite message of the words. The words give permission, the tone gives the opposite, prohibition. The Quran has tones to it. And so taking all of this in, understanding all of this is part of understanding the Quranic way. Not just what we read, but how what we read, how the Quran is transmitted to us. And then what is it saying in its various parts. And in particularly what we're interested in this class is how that occurred historically in the earliest, the very first community of believers. So how, because the Sahabas were there taking all of this in. And they were growing and developing in their Islam. And so we want to sort of archaeologically go on that trip, take that trip as best as we can. This is obviously an introduction. The Quran, who knows the meaning of the word Quran? What does the word Quran mean?
The recitation.
The recitation, excellent. What else does it mean?
The ever read.
Huh?
The ever read.
The book that's ever read. Yes, very good. Okay. Recitation. The book that's constantly read. Quran, Al-Quran, as we know it, means, if we could put it into English, the book that is to be read and recited constantly. The book that is to be read and recited. Now, what's the difference between reading and reciting? Shut up.
To read is to understand, to recite is to convey.
To read is to understand, to recite is to convey. When you hear reading, what kinds of concepts come into your mind?
Vocabulary.
Vocabulary, what else?
Contents.
Okay. If I tell a child, go read, what does that mean? You're bothering me. Stop, just go read. What does that mean? Huh? I heard it from here. Right, silence. Right? Reading is something that's very silent. That's very private. Reading is something that's also very personal. That is isolated. Right? If I'm just sitting here reading, I'm not involved in the public sphere. I'm not involved in anything interpersonal. It's a private matter. Recitation, on the other hand, involves what? To recite something, what do you need? Generally speaking. What does that also mean? It's out loud. Out loud, well, if you speak out loud, if you're alone in the building, what's the purpose, right? If you speak out loud, what's entailed in that?
That you have an audience.
That there's an audience. Thank you. There's an audience. There's an interlocutor there. Otherwise, what's the need to speak out? Why do you speak out loud? There's an audience. So this is very, very important. The name of the book that Allah has given this community is that it's a book that is to be read, i.e. it's supposed to function in the private, individual realm, and recited. It's also supposed to be projected out and announced to the community. It's supposed to be a very public event. The Quran is supposed to be able to function in both domains, both areas. Its relevance is to both the public and the private. That's the name of the book. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, خَيْرُكُمْ, the best of you, مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَهُ. The best of you is the one that has learned the Quran and then taught it. The first thing that we are required to do is to learn the Quran and then to teach it, i.e. to convey it. And so we convey it in our lives, in our speeches, in our actions, and our inactions. There was an interesting encounter with the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab. His name is Abdullah, the son of Umar, where he met with a student who was memorizing the Quran, and he asked him, have you memorized Surah Al-Baqarah? And the student, he said, yes. He said, yeah, I did it in a few months. And he was surprised. He said, Subhanallah, wallahi. He said, it took me 8 years to learn Baqarah. He says, because when we learned the Quran, we practiced it. That's the Quranic way. That's the Quranic way. So, if you were like me, and you grew up in an environment that didn't have, when I was a kid, I didn't have teachers to go to help me memorize the Quran. There was no Hafiz program when I was a kid. Our first Hafiz program developed when I was like 17 years old, about to go to college. I never had the opportunity to enter into a Hafiz program to sit and study the Quran, memorize it full time. I started learning the Quran on the bus to school, just listening to cassette tapes. And most of us probably like that. But we're interested now at our level, we're maybe not so interested in memorizing as much as we are interested in understanding and practicing and applying. So this is what this class is about. I think in the process you'll eventually memorize, but I think you'll memorize better when you have a greater understanding of not only what's being said, but why it's being said that way and what's behind it being said. The Quran contains about 6,200 verses, give or take, around 6,200 verses. From those 6,200 some odd verses, only about 350 of those, 360, relate to actually ahkam and sharia and law as we know it. The rest of the verses are verses of theology, verses of ethics and morality, and verses about the life of all the prophets. And that is really important because all those verses about the prophets' lives, all of those verses contain ethical and moral injunctions that we are supposed to take to heart. So they are not for granted. Each story that's told over again, the reason it's told over again is because Allah Ta'ala wants you to see it from a different lens. It's very important that sometimes the Quran will present one image of an event, and then in a different chapter he presents the Quran presents the exact same event, but from a different lens. The idea is to teach the human being to be able to see one thing and to be able to observe it from different vantage points. Okay, and not just to be sort of monolithic in one way. We'll run up against examples of that, inshallah ta'ala. There is an etiquette, an adab, that we as readers and reciters of the Quran, there is an adab and etiquette that we are required to uphold and to maintain. The Quran is, do you know for the American flag, do you know there's etiquette for the American flag, for the treatment of the American flag? Do you know you can't, for example, let it touch the ground? The U.S. flag, you can't. If you're dealing with the flag, no, you can't allow it to touch the ground. It has to be folded a certain way. It can only be raised at certain times, and then at other times, it has to be lowered in a certain way. Certain events that happen, it's supposed to be what's called half staff. It's supposed to be lowered to half the pole, for example. There's a certain way it's folded. You just can't like fold the American flag like you fold laundry when it comes out of the dryer. There's a certain way that it has to be folded. Right. There's an etiquette with the American flag. I would love for one of you to do a paper on comparing the etiquettes with the American flag and the etiquettes with the Quran. Like, that would be a very, very, and compare the etiquettes and then do an analysis at the end. Who's going to do that? So many volunteers. SubhanAllah. Don't everybody volunteer. Really, Marjana, put your hand down, baby. You can't do that. Child, she doesn't know what she's volunteering. Right. Be profound. Do you know the scholars of Tafseer? You going to do it, Tamana? MashaAllah. Excellent. The scholars of Tafseer, they say that not only does the Quran have etiquette, but if you touch the Bible because Muslims believe that there is truth, listen to my words carefully, there is truth in the Bible. And there are verses in the Bible that says that there is no God but Him, for example. Same verse in the Quran. La ilaha illa huwa, for example. That's a verse of truth. It's in the Bible, it's truth. It's different from saying the entire Bible is true, but there is truth in the Bible that comes from the word of Allah in the past. The scholars of Tafseer say that even when you carry or touch the Bible, you should still handle it with honor and dignity and respect because of the truth of Allah is contained there. There's etiquette in the sacred words. So the Quran has etiquette. And so we want to go over quickly the etiquettes, really quickly, the bullet points, the main etiquettes of the Quran. And then what I'll do is I'll give you a particular title to read for you to purchase on your own, a good book to read about this, inshallah ta'ala, in detail. So the first etiquette of the Quran is that before you read the Quran or recite the Quran, not from memory, I'm talking about when you have the Mus'haf, the book open in front of you, the first etiquette is to clean the mouth. That's the first etiquette. Even if you're not able to have a toothbrush, get up and brush your teeth, the ulama say that even you should make the gesture to take your sleeve, or if you're a woman, to a part of your hijab, your scarf, or a man for his collar, and just go across the teeth. 1, 2, 3. And make your intentions for cleaning the teeth for the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ stipulated that you should use siwak, you should brush your teeth, clean your teeth, and clean your mouth before you read the Quran. If you're not able to do that, at least make the gesture where you take something and go over your teeth 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Make your intentions to do that and practicing the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and demonstrating the adab, the etiquette of the Quran. Yes? Rinsing your mouth as well, but it has to be something where you actually clean your teeth. It should mimic brushing your teeth. 2 is when you are. Anybody else have a question? I'm sorry, I thought I missed a hand. Yes.
Do these etiquettes also apply to when you're reading it off like an iPhone or an iPad?
Yes. Very good. question. Yes, they do apply if you're reading the Quran off of the computer, iPad, iPhone, etc. Same etiquettes. Yes. Which relates to the second part is tahara. If you are dealing with the Arabic, the all Arabic, yani what's called the Mus'haf, the Quran. There's no translation here, no footnotes, no Tafseer in Arabic. It's the Mus'haf. If you have the Mus'haf in your hands, you have to have wudu. You have to have wudu. Yes, there is a minority opinion in Islam that says you do not have to have wudu. That is a minority opinion. It is recorded in the books for academic purposes, not for application. Academic purposes. So you can know in history there was this scholar who disagreed with the greater community of scholars. But for the Mus'haf, you have to have wudu. If you're not dealing with the Mus'haf, if you're dealing with Arabic and English, the Arabic of the Quran and a translation in English or a translation in any language, you do not have to have wudu. If you're dealing with the Arabic of the Quran with a tafsir around it or notes around it in Arabic or in any other language, you do not have to have wudu. If you are looking at the Quran in your iPhone and you're scrolling down and on one side there's Arabic and another side there's English or something, you do not have to have wudu. But if you are scrolling on your iPhone and all there is just Quran, yes, you have to have wudu.
So if it's iPhone or iPad, all the
Abs-
rules of
if it's
Mus'haf goes
all
for
of the others applied, yes.
whatever.
If I wish there was a board, if I had a board here and I wrote an ayat of Quran on the board and nothing else, I have to have wudu to touch the board.
There's a board over there if you want.
Yes. Yeah, to touch, yeah. If, and I intend an ayat of Quran. For example, if I write just Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim and I don't intend it as an ayat of Quran, I intend it just for barakah, just for blessings, no, I don't have to have wudu to touch the board. Okay. But if I write, for example, the Fatiha on the board and there's nothing else on the board, I have to have wudu to touch the board. If I write the Fatiha on the board and then I write in English the translation, now I don't have to have wudu to touch the
So
board.
for all the madhahs, for example,
Absolutely.
even teaching it,
Absolutely.
because I know when I was young, it's like teacher, woman teacher, they just come and do teach. And in the classroom, whatever situation is.
Now,
I
there,
don't know if it has anything with madhab or not, but that's what I'm asking.
now, there is a particular exemption for women that are on their menstrual cycles. Yes, typically the rule is that when a woman's on her menstrual cycle, it's haram to touch the Arabic, all Arabic of the Quran. However, there's an exception. The exception is, well, I shouldn't say exception. The rule is to touch with the hands. If there's a barrier, then she can touch the Quran. If she's wearing, gloves, or if she's using some type of barrier, then that exemption is not, that rule is not there. Okay. My sister, for example, used to study in Damascus, and she used to tell me stories about how the women there, the teachers, when they're teaching Quran, they talk all the time, even on their. We're talking about touching the Quran. We're not talking about reciting. We're talking about touching.
They are
So even
they are
those-
reciting while holding,
Right.
because they have to teach the
Right,
kids.
right. Or they take a pen or a stick or something and go on the line or something like that. Even for a man as well, the same rule for a man. If you don't have wudu, you cannot touch the Mus'haf of the Quran. If you want to touch it, you have to use gloves, or you have to use a pen or a stick and go over the lines or something like that if you're trying to show something. If you can't make wudu, you make tayammum. And if you, and that's it, yes.
Is this a part of adult ethics, or is this a sinful act?
Yes, hold on a second. Okay. It's considered an obligation. It's included in the adab, in the etiquette, but it is an obligation. Yeah, it's included in the adabs to make sure the information spread around as well. But it is the case. Now, where does this come from? It comes from the Quran itself. Yes.
If a woman is on her menstrual cycle, can she touch the Arabic and English?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely. If you're dealing with Arabic with footnotes in the back, or any Arabic notes, absolutely. The rule does not apply in that case. We're just talking about the all Arabic Mus'haf. Okay. And yes.
Does she recite or read?
Yes, yeah, she can recite and read, but if you, and particularly for men or anybody who's in a state of junub where you have to take a ghusl, you're not allowed. You are allowed to recite the Quran, but with the intention of dhikr, with the intention of remembrance of Allah. Okay. If a person has to take a ghusl, like they've just been with their spouse and they've had sexual relations with their spouse, you have to take a ghusl. Or in the case of a woman on her menstrual cycle where she's waiting to take a ghusl, you're not allowed to recite Quran except with the intention of dhikr, remembrance of Allah, not with the intention of actual recitation. Okay? So you have to recite in an instance of purity. Now the Prophet used to recite when he didn't have wudu. If you don't have wudu, yes, you can recite the Quran, there's no problem with that. But if you're in a situation where you have to make ghusl, and you know, ghusl is a much bigger state of purity, then you have to actually perform ghusl and then you can recite. Or you can go ahead and recite, but your intention has to be to remember Allah. You're just reciting and you're doing dhikr, to remember Allah. Yes, sir.
When you say that your intention has to be recitation versus like dhikr, does that mean that like when you recite it can be with an audience? Or I don't understand what the difference is.
Dhikr is something that you just do alone with you.
So would it be an audience?
Right, right. And you can teach people. You can also teach with that intention as well. If you have students, you can teach as well. But the intention is still dhikr as well, absolutely.
What if you're like in a group and you're doing dhikr?
Yeah, it's permissible. Yeah, yeah. But your intention is dhikr.
Just as another example, so if you want to recite Quran in during Ramadan, like you can't count your recitation during your menstrual cycle as a part of that
You
entire
can.
recitation.
You can, yes.
You can.
Absolutely, absolutely. But your intention is dhikr. So the intention changes,
Okay.
not the act. But you're still rewarded for reciting the Quran. Yeah, you still get the reward because the Prophet ﷺ said, whenever you recite the Quran, you get blessed. You get 10 blessings, 10 hasanat for every letter you recite. And then he said, I don't say that alif, lam, mim is a letter. He said alif is a letter, lam is a letter, mim is a letter. So each one of those you get the blessings for. Absolutely. Anyway.
So you mean that if we're doing a khatma, would that count?
For doing?
If we're doing a khatma and during
Yes, it
Ramadan,
would. Yeah, absolutely.
So we can still read?
Yes, you can. Absolutely, absolutely.
So you're saying
With the niyyah of dhikr.
As opposed to what? As opposed to...
With the niyyah of dhikr, you can. Yeah, your intention is dhikr. Why?
As
Because
opposed to what?
as opposed to tilawa, as opposed to recitation. The rules of tahara are related to reciting the Quran. The person who has the intention to recite it. The person who has intention for just dhikr, like personal dhikr, then the rules of tahara are not like that. Because you can do any type of dhikr in any state. For example, I can walk around without wudu, without ghusl, and say 100 times, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, all day long. You know, I can do it anytime I want, at any moment I want. It is not bound by the rules of purity, by the rules of tahara. Although, La ilaha illallah is a verse in the Quran. Allah Ta'ala says, Fa'alam, know, annahu la ilaha illallah. Know that there's no God but Allah. So La ilaha illallah is a verse of the Quran. But the moment I take it out of that frame, and I say, well, I want to use this as dhikr because Allah Ta'ala also calls the Quran a dhikr, so you can use it as a dhikr. And I take La ilaha illallah, and in my mind, when I say it, in my heart, when I say it, I mean it as a dhikr, as a form of remembrance, then it's a dhikr, not a tilawah, not a recitation. The reward, the effect on you, the reward is the same. Okay, so you get reward for reciting anything from the Quran. You get 10 blessings for reciting anything from the Quran. Okay, but the difference is the difference is that you are not binding yourself to the rules of tahara, and because you're not treating it as a tilawa, as a recitation. Okay. Yes.
But when you're going from cover to cover,
Even
that, but then
even that. The
So-
entire Quran is called dhikr. If you have the intention to treat it as a dhikr, then you can read the entire Quran, cover to cover.
So what should women do in Ramadan, for example? Like, should we make it from the beginning our intention to
No,
do?
make it. You can do it as dhikr, or you can do it as tilawa. But when a woman's on her menstrual cycle, there has to be dhikr.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Right? So outside of that, whatever you want. But outside of that, whatever. And same thing for brothers, if they're in a state of janaba and they have to do ghusl, you have to do it, you have to make the intention for dhikr, not recitation. Okay? Yes?
Just two quick questions.
Mhm.
So if you have a word of reading Kahf, Surah Al-Kahf on
Every Friday, good question.
So that would count as dhikr?
Yes, you continue. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
what about if you're memorizing the Quran and you write? Can you write it when you're not?
Excuse me. No, because then now you're talking about touching it.
Oh, okay.
Right? So you'd have
So
to
you
use
can't
gloves or
write it.
something like that. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Let's wait till we'll put them till after class, inshallah. The next thing is the Bismillah, the Ta'awudh and the Bismillah. Saying A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem and then Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now, you say A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. I seek refuge in Allah from Shaitan the accursed, the one who's cursed. It is strong sunnah, high sunnah recommended to say that. Absolutely, before you begin anything from the Quran. And then, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. But there is one chapter of the Quran that you're not supposed to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim with. Anybody know that chapter? Right, which is chapter 9 of the Quran, chapter Tawbah, Surah Tawbah. It's also called Surah Al-Bara because that's the first word in the chapter, in the surah. So in that case, particularly with chapter 9, with Surah Tawbah, the etiquette is you say A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, and then you go right to the chapter, Bara'atu Min Allahi. So obviously you don't say the Bismillah there, and to say the Bismillah, if you wanted to introduce it and to say it, it is makruh, it is disliked. Okay? Because yes.
I heard that if you're like in the middle of a chapter, like you're not at the beginning of it, then you should actually just start with the Alhamdulillah and not.
Similar as well. Yeah, if you're starting in the middle of the verse as well. Right. Okay. The last 3 points. 1, pondering, reflecting. Anything you read from the Quran, you're supposed to ponder and reflect on it. Any type of verse. There was a man who led the prayer, I believe it was Maghrib or Isha, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet wasn't there. And then later, some people from the Jamaat complained to the Prophet. They said, Ya Rasulullah, so and so led the prayer, and all he did was just over and over and over again recite Surah Al-Ikhlas. Can you imagine if whoever's leading Maghrib tonight, they just Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam. Bismillahir Rahmanir Qul huwallahu ahad. Can you imagine if somebody did that? You'd say, okay, come on, brother. How about Ikhlas? How about Falak? Can we go to Nas? How about Kawthar? There's a lot more to the Quran than that. So the Prophet went and saw the man, and he said, the Jamaat's complaining that you constantly recited Surah Al-Ikhlas in this one rakat. The man, he said, yes. He said, did you do that? The man said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, I did it. He said, but I've constantly kept finding deeper meanings every time I recited it. So for me, it wasn't the same. SubhanAllah. And the Prophet ﷺ smiled and approved. So yes, you can recite the same, and even at times, the Prophet ﷺ would recite the same verse over and over again. I had a Sheikh, do that in Yemen. To be honest with you, and it was with ikhlas too. SubhanAllah. It was with ikhlas. I'll never forget. All he said was, Qul huwa Allahu ahad. And he stopped. And he was like, Qul huwa Allahu ahad. And he just kept doing it and doing it, maybe 5-6 times. And then after that, Allahu samad. And those of you that are familiar with teachers, it was Habib Ahmad. It was Habib Ahmad that did that. And first time it hits you, Qul, say, wow. But people don't recite like that. They say, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad. They sort of recite, just to get it out. Just like you have a speech to give, you just want to deliver it. Right? But no, this is about reflecting. Qul huwa Allahu, and he stopped. Ahad. There's emphasis there. Why do we have, how many of you have learned a little bit about tajweed? Rules of tartil, tajweed. There's this thing called med. You ever hear in the Quran when people recite غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ? You ever people elongate certain words? Why do we have med in the Quran? Allah wants you to focus on that word. That's why. There's certain words in the Quran Allah Ta'ala wants to draw your attention to. There's a reason there, because we're supposed to be pondering and reflecting. And so the med rules, the rules of elongation are there to allow us the opportunity to pause on that word. So just like life goes so fast, sometimes you need to take a break, take a pause. So the rules of med are there, are instituted for that, to aid in pondering and reflecting. So ponder and reflect as much as you can. There's a beautiful hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, الَّذِي يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ وَهُوَ مَاهِرٌ بِهِ, the one who recites the Qur'an and they're mahir, they're very skilled in the recitation, they're professional, they know what they're doing. مَعَ السَّفْرَةِ الْكَرَامِ الْبَرَرَةِ, they will be with the safra, they will be with the high-level angels, al-kiram, honorable angels, in the Day of Judgment. They'll be in that kind of company. وَالَّذِي يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ, but the other person who recites the Qur'an, وَيَتَتَعْتَعْ فِيهِ, and they stutter when they're reciting. They have trouble reciting. They have difficulty pronouncing the words. I'll never forget my mother, like we didn't have, when I was a kid, I told you there's nobody able to really teach Quran so well, so definitely not for women. So my mother sort of learned on her own. I'll never forget, she told me, and I saw her struggling, again, with Surah Al-Ikhlas. She used to tell me that to read 3 or 4 verses of the Mus'haf, 3 or 4 verses of a page of the Quran, it would take her half an hour. And she said, she used to cry at the difficulty of reading the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one who reads the Quran, وَيَتَتَعْتَعْ فِيهِ, and they have difficulty, they're stuttering, they're struggling with the Quran, they're not proficient in it. وَهُوَ عَلَيْهِ شَاقٌ, and that effort that's difficult for them. It's a burden on them. Lahu ajran, that person gets 2 rewards. SubhanAllah. One for the recitation, the other for struggling through the difficulty. SubhanAllah. Don't ever feel that you are less, you're somehow deficient because you're not skilled like the professional reciters. But the fact that you persist, you persevere, you try, you do your best, you don't give up with the Quran, you don't allow your lack of fluency, the fact that your tongue doesn't move in a certain way that it does with the native speakers or with those that are trained. You don't let that distract you from developing a relationship with the Book of Allah. So you strive harder, so you're rewarded greater. Rawah al-Bukhari, related in Bukhari. And so, when we recite the Quran, you can ponder, you can reflect. Even if you don't know what it means, and you're struggling with the words, you can reflect on the fact that at least I'll get 2 levels of barakah out of this. It's worth it. And connected with that, the last, second to the last adab I'll mention is weeping, crying, weeping. Prophet ﷺ said, when you read the Quran, weep, cry. And if you can't weep, make yourself weep. So, understand that one of the most profound verses, استعيذ بالله لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل. If this Quran was revealed on a mountain, لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا. You would see the mountain out of fear of Allah tremble and become cleft and just become destroyed and turn to dust min khashyatillah, because of the fear of Allah. وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ. That's an example that we give to people. لَعَلَّهُمْ, so that those people يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, can start thinking about the Quran. So if this solid rock, how many of you went on the hiking trip that the IC had like last month? Yeah, imagine the Quran revealed on that mountain, that whole thing, you wouldn't have anything to hike. It would just be level. Right? So difficult to climb that mountain, but that mountain would just drop and become dust if it were able to comprehend the amount of moral responsibility that the Quran calls for. If it were able to comprehend the amount of commands and prohibitions and the standards of human conduct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls for in the Quran. If it knew that, it would fall out. It would, because it couldn't do it out of fear of Allah. It would lose itself. So if something so strong would lose itself, at times we have to lose ourselves as well, start crying. Because we comprehend the Quran, because we understand it. And as Imam Ghazali says, he says, if you can't cry at the Quran and you don't know why you can't cry, you should cry because you can't cry. Cry for your state because you can't cry. Recite clearly, have a niyyah, have the right intention, and when you come across someone else that's reciting the Quran or that's reading the Quran, when you encounter them, you walk in here, there's a sister reading the Quran, there's a brother reading the Quran, the etiquette is not to greet them. Not to greet them. As a matter of fact, if the person walks up to someone who's reading the Quran, they're reading the Quran, they're engaged in reciting the book of Allah. They come up and they say, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. The person reading the Quran is not obliged to respond until they finish. SubhanAllah, the obligation to respond to the salam is lifted on the person who's reading and reciting the Quran until they finish. It's very powerful. So you don't interrupt your recitation, or let me go back. You're not obliged to stop your recitation to reply to salams. If you reply to salams, if you want to, then the proper etiquette is to complete the verse. Don't just stop in the middle of the verse. Complete the verse, then reply. If it's a longer verse, hold your hand up, give a gesture, finish the verse, then take a break and reply. So that's the etiquette. So you never cut a verse in the middle for someone else. You finish the verse, finish the idea, finish the thought, finish the sentence, then you can reply to them, see what their needs are, address them politely, and then go back to your reading. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, مثل المؤمن الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الأترجة. The likeness, the example of the mu'min, of the believer, again, notice the Prophet said mu'min, not Muslim. Very interesting. It's the level of mu'min that they read the Quran. The example or the similitude of the believer that recites the Quran is that of a particular plant called the citron plant. ريحها طيب, its fragrance is beautiful, is good. وطعمها طيب, and its taste is good. The likeness of the believer that recites the Quran is the likeness of this particular plant called the citrus plant. Citrus, C-I-T-R-O-S, not U-S. It's the fragrance that it gives off, the aura that it gives off, the character that it shows, what it radiates to people is good, and its taste is good. When you have interactions with that person, they're good. وَمَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ, and the example of the believer that doesn't recite the Quran. The Quran sits on their desk, it just collects dust, and it's only taken out during Ramadan. Right? It comes out during Ramadan, goes back in during Ramadan. Right? It's a Ramadan Quran. Mathalu tamra, that person is like the date. La riha lahu, there's no fragrance that emits from the date. The date has no smell. There's nothing that affects another person. There's no aura that is transferred to another person. There's no fragrance. There's no spirit. وَطَعْمُهَا حُلُوٌ, but its taste is sweet. When you do come in contact with that mu'min, because they're a mu'min, you still have a positive experience with that mu'min. وَمَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقِ, الذي يقرأ القرآن. Excuse me. The example of the munafiq, the hypocrite, the person who says they're Muslim but they don't really live up to the dictates of Islam, the ethics of Islam, the requirements of Islam, they don't practice. The example of this person who reads the Quran, Methil Rayhana, is like the spice basil. Rihuha tayyib, its scent is good because it takes in the Quran. This person's, they may give off a good aura, وَطَعْمُهَا مُرٌّ, but when you taste it, it's bitter. You actually have physical, personal contact with that munafiq who reads the Quran. When you actually have experience with them, you find bitterness there. It's not like the believer that recites the Quran. وَمَثَلُ الْمُنَافِقِ الَّذِي لَا يَقْرَأُ الْقُرْآنَ. And the example, or the similitude of the believer, the munafiq that does not recite the Quran. لَيْسَ لَهَا رِيحٌ وَطَعْمُهَا مُرٌّ. This person doesn't have a fragrance, and their taste is bitter. Their taste is bitter. Rawahu al-Bukhari wa Muslim. Yeah, so we want to be people who give off good fragrances, and when people encounter us, when they have a taste of us, they find sweetness. And this comes when we have a good understanding of the Quran so that we can practice what we give in, what we take in, we want to give out. And finally, the last thing I'll mention, inshallah, is the difference between tafseer and ta'wil. There's two terms that we have in our tradition that refer to the understanding and the explanation of the Quran. Tafseer and ta'wil. Both of them mean explanation or not interpretation, but explanation or exegesis in English, but they have very different meanings in the tradition. Anybody know what the difference is between tafseer and ta'wil? Is the word tafseer in the Quran? Does the Quran mention the word, the actual word tafseer? Do we find that word in the Quran? Anybody know? Who's hafiz in here, by the way? Who's memorized all the Quran here? Anyone? SubhanAllah, no one. Maybe you're all like me, you never had teachers. Okay, in many ways this is good, because I guarantee you, with the exception of Ibad, I've never met one hafiz of Quran that's a student, that's not a scholar. I've never met one hafiz that can tell you anything about the understanding of what they know. They can recite all day, but you ask them about an ayat of Quran, I've never met one student that can give you a tafsir, much less a ta'wil. Even more translation. So this is important for you to know because there's a distinction. Yes, Hamza. Yes, ta'wil is. That was going to be my second question. Ta'wil is in the Quran, tafsir is not. Just like the word tajweed. Tajweed is not in the Quran. Tartil is in the Quran. Tartil is the proper word for recitation. Nowadays, we all use the word tajweed to refer to the recitation of the Quran, when in reality that is not the proper term. Historically and Quranically, there's no such thing, Quranically, there's no such thing as tajweed. Quranically, the term is tartil, not tajweed. Tajweed is an invention that came into the Islamic tradition after 2 centuries after the Prophet's death, about 200 years after the Prophet died. Then the term tajweed emerged. Why? Because they would take, when there was a lot of weddings in the Muslim, the major cities, they would invite professional Quran reciters for entertainment, as part of the entertainment, and they would sit them down and they would say, can you just recite the Quran in like a really slow way, not like in the Salat, but slow it down a little bit, just so people can listen to it. And this invention of tajweed emerged, and because it was so beautiful, and they used to they would pay more money to people that had better voices, they stopped calling it tartil, like the Quran called it, recitation. Tartil means recitation. The Quran says, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. When you recite Quran, do it with tartil, not tajweed. Do it with tartil. That's in the verse of the Quran, which we'll learn. Tajweed became when someone said, can you do jawwadu alayha, can you make it tajweed? Jawwadu from jayyid, to make it nice. Can you embellish it? Can you embellish your recitation? And this genre of embellishing and decorating the Quranic recitation that already exists, by slowing it down, that was called tajweed. And in the modern period, we've now taken the term tajweed, which means embellishment, and it has now become a term for the recitation of the Quran, and it has replaced the Quranic term which is mentioned twice. Tartil is mentioned twice. Allah clearly says, do it with tartil. We've actually replaced the term, and everybody knows that it's tajweed. Now, find me one book, other than the book that I wrote, that my teacher wrote. Find me one book, and books in Arabic, that says the rules of tartil, and I'll be very happy with you. I'll say good job. They all say tajweed. Learn the rules of tajweed. Tajweed in 10 minutes. Who wants to learn a tajweed class? Tajweed is not part of the recitation of the Quran. No one recites the Quran in the salat with tajweed. You use tartil. So we have to go, this is what I call the Quranic way. Go back to our tradition, understand what it's called for. So tajweed, real tajweed is professional, it's slow. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. That's tajweed. Would you like to pray behind somebody who recited like that in the salat? It'd take you 30 minutes to pray Maghrib. 40 minutes. You'd love it, but your legs get tired after a while. Don't forget Taraweeh. You'd be here all day. Okay? Everybody's pull out the chairs and sit down. That's tajweed. Allah Ta'ala didn't say it like that. He said, recite Quran in tartil. Tartil is Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. That's tartil. We call it tajweed today. So let's get back on the Quranic way. We can accept the change, but we have to know what it is. Let's be educated about it. Okay. So, the difference between tafseer, which as a word is not in the Quran, but it doesn't matter. It's okay because it's not in the glasses aren't in the Quran. It doesn't mean you can't do it. But tafseer and ta'wil, which is in the Quran. Tafseer means the explanation of what the words in the verse of the Quran actually mean, or meant. Put it like that, meant. Yeah. The explanation of what the verses of the Quran, the words of the Quran meant. What does that mean? It means it's the way the Sahabas understood that meaning. It's one-dimensional. The verse means this, or the word means that. One way. That is tafsir. Tafsir is based off of empirical data. Let me tell you explain what I mean by that. Empirical data means that the word means that because we actually know of a companion of the Prophet that took that meaning from the Prophet. You can trace it back. That companion heard that the Prophet said the word means this, or the verse means that. So it's empirical. It was heard by the companion, or it was seen. The companion saw that event that occurred, and the companion saw the context, or was a part of the context, which gave rise to that verse or that chapter coming down. That's what I mean by empirical. That's tafsir. Ta'wil is taking that information and bridging it to today. That's ta'wil. Where do we go from there? That's ta'wil. How far can we take it? That's ta'wil. How far is that context, that concrete empirical data, how far is it applicable? How far does it go? in the verse that says, let's use a simple example. يا أيها النبي لم تحرم ما أحل الله لك تبتغي مرضات أزواجك. O Prophet, in Surah Tahrim, why do you make haram what Allah made halal for you? Do you want to make your wife happy and make Allah not happy? You want the happiness of your wife over the happiness of Allah? Why do you make haram what Allah made halal? Why do you do that, Prophet? Well, according to Tafseer, that verse occurred when the Prophet ﷺ made a particular decision to no longer drink this honey type sherbet drink that his wife Hafsa had made for him because of a particular event that happened, which we won't go into right now because it's too long. And it caused so much problems, the Prophet ﷺ said, from now on it's haram for me. There's another possibility of that, we won't get into that either. And he said it's haram for me from now on. And Hafsa hurt Hafsa's feelings because she was good at it, and it was a gesture that she was doing from the goodness of her heart to please her husband. And because other people were jealous, the Prophet made it haram for him to drink it. Said he'd never do it anymore. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervened. Why do you make that haram for you? Allah didn't make it haram for you. Why do you do it? When did you get into the business of deciding what is haram? You are not the Sharia. You are not the lawgiver. Only Allah legislates. We don't legislate. That's the point. I just gave you ta'weel. The tafsir is, it occurred at that time, in that context. That's the tafsir. Ta'weel, what do we do with it today? Can human beings themselves legislate and decide what's haram and what's halal on their own, independent of revelation? Can we have our own legislative mechanisms today and say we no longer, for example, we no longer need revelation. We can make our own laws. We can decide with our own rational minds what is ethically good and morally good and ethically bad and morally bad for us. Can we legislate ethical and legal matters? Can we make halal and make haram on our own, independent of Allah? That's ta'weel. No, we can't. Why? Because Allah censured the Prophet for doing it with something as small as honey. What about trying to rule people's lives? Right. So that's ta'weel. See, we just took that event from 1400 years ago and dropped it into 2013 today and made it a political discussion. Instantly. Okay? That's ta'weel. Now, the issue of human legislation was not the context of that verse. The Prophet wasn't sitting with a council of Sahabas and they weren't conspiring to legislate about what was halal and what was haram for the community. That was a private issue in the house of the Prophet between him and Hafsa and his other wives. That's the tafsir. The ta'weel is, now let's bring it into today. What does that mean for today's society? What does that mean for the community today? How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala checking that behavior, how does that put a check on this behavior today? That's ta'weel. Tafsir is one way. Ta'weel is many ways. There's many ways you can go with that discussion. Okay? Tafsir is one way because it's historical. Because it's based upon one event. Now there may be a difference of opinion about which one event. Yes, you might have heard, for example, different narrations about when Surah Al-Fatiha came down. One narration said Surah Al-Fatiha came down in the Meccan period. Another narration says Surah Al-Fatiha came down in the Medinan period. Well, that doesn't make sense. It's either Meccan or Medinan. Well, no, it's both. Allah Ta'ala, in both periods, revealed the Fatiha. Once in Mecca and then again in Medina. So there's no way in the world you can not include the Fatiha as part of the Quran. It's the opening of both periods, actually. So these things, having an understanding of the context is very important because it allows you to discern which things you can actually do ta'weel with and which things you cannot. Which things are historical but need to be bridged into contemporary modernity and which things are historical and need to stay in history. It's very important. So there are some matters that are absent are not part of that discussion. For example, if I give you a verse and say, look at this verse in the Quran, it says, فَعَلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. There's no ilah except Allah. Well, that's a simple theological discussion. Its context was Mecca and Medina. Its context is also New York today. It's the same exact context. It doesn't change, because the matter is the same. Now, you might tell me, well, there's a way to do ta'wil. You can take the term ilah and you can make it into other terms that are modern. For example, money is an ilah and gambling is an ilah. Now, that's a different discussion. That's a different discussion. So we have tafseer, we have ta'wil. Finally, for every for tafsir, there's one way. For ta'wil, there's many ways, as I said. For ta'wil, there's another way to look at ta'wil also. For ta'wil, there's what's called you can give an external, sort of a zahiri explanation, and then you can give an internal, sort of a batin explanation, sort of a spiritual explanation. The Prophet ﷺ said, for every verse in the Quran, there's a zahir and a batin. There's an outwardly manifest meaning and an inwardly sort of deeper spiritual meaning as well. Okay? So you can interpret, for example, if there's a verse in the Quran that talks about the shaking of the earth as a result of the Day of Judgment coming, right? The shaking of the earth. It can be the physical earth that actually shakes. Yes, valid, of course, true. Part of the tafsir, part of the ta'wil. Okay. But then you can go a little bit deeper spiritually and say that the earth is a metaphor of the human being and the soul of the human being. And the shaking that occurs there is the shaking of the spirit of the human being and the consciousness of the human being when they encounter certain events that are life-changing. There's also a valid way to interpret the Quran as well. Some of those we'll look at, some of those we will not look at, right? Because we won't have time to do everything.
Can you repeat the names anonymously? The internal and external?
Batin, internal. Zahir, external. Batin, internal, which here means deeper and spiritual, ruh. And zahir, which means external. Is it me or is it cold in here? It's cold in here, yeah. Tell you, alhamdulillah, we could be burning. It's okay. I'll take the cold. Okay. Excuse me. All right, so that concludes our introduction for the class. What we're going to do is go chronologically, inshallah ta'ala, as best as we can. There are, as you know, the Quran was revealed in the Meccan period and the Medinan period. The Meccan period actually has 2 or 3 phases to it, depending on how you look at it. By far, the overwhelming majority of the Quran is a product of the Meccan period in terms of context, historical context. There are not few, but certainly I would say 3/4 of the Quran is Meccan. The remaining, obviously, 1/4 is Medina. So we will definitely begin with the Meccan part. What was the first chapter of the Quran to be revealed? Surah Al-Alaq, right? Iqra, right. Very good. So what I'll ask you to do, here's now, my commitment, inshallah, is we'll teach the class, inshallah. You have a commitment too. I need a commitment from all of you. 1, come to class with your Qurans. I don't care if it's electronic. I don't care if it's paperback. Come to class in hand with a Quran. 2, because we'll be going line by line. Okay, and I need you to follow along, inshallah. You should have a notebook with you or something to take notes on, inshallah. 2, before every class, read the chapter. okay, that chapter. Read it well, okay? If you want to memorize it, I'll leave it up to you to memorize. But read it well. Read it before class. Even if you're so busy, you're getting off from work, if you take 5 minutes, sit right out here, open up, read it. I know everyone's English is very good in here. Try the Arabic. Okay? Force yourself to get those double blessings that the Prophet talked about. We will be working from the Arabic. Okay? Yes, we'll put it into English, we'll explain it inshallah, so you don't know Arabic, you will not feel left out, guaranteed inshallah. But, because of what we're doing, we will be working in Arabic. Okay? So definitely if you've got an all English translation, you need to have the Arabic somehow with you. I highly recommend this one here. This is the Abdul Halim translation, but use any translation it has Arabic and English with it, but any translation you want is fine. But definitely read the chapter, read the surah before you come. In English, know it, and in Arabic, read it, inshallah. We will, inshallah, do a very simple tafseer of every verse, okay? Inshallah ta'ala. We will also, inshallah, do a ta'wil as well, as much as we can. And we'll also highlight particular concepts, words in verses that are really important words for us to understand, okay, for the Quranic way. So we will work from Surah Al-Alaq. Inshallah, next week, next Friday, I'll have a guest speaker come in, inshallah ta'ala, to cover a topic for you, inshallah ta'ala. So we will actually begin with Surah Al-Alaq 2 weeks from now. So we've got 2 weeks to work, inshallah. With some of the shorter surahs in the Quran, we'll cover several of those in one class, inshallah. You all got the flyer, I think, or got the information on the class, so you know what chapters we'll be covering. We're following a particular order. So does anybody have that with them, by any chance? Who does? Okay, thank you. So we'll do Surah Al-Alaq, and then after that, yes.
The flyer, Imam Khalid's email did not include it. Private emails that were going out including the flyer. So I don't think everyone got the attachment.
Does everybody get the, okay. Yes, Sister Khadij, can I get it really quickly? Thank you, please. Shukran. Or, here, let me not let you walk so far. I'm sorry. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you. Okay. So, definitely for our first session, we'll cover 2 things, 2 chapters for our next session. Or for our first session in Tafseer, inshallah, the Quranic way. One is chapter 96, and the second is chapter 74. Inshallah, we'll cover both of those chapters in our first. Next week, we'll have a guest speaker, inshallah ta'ala, to come in. So we will not start with 96 next Friday. We'll start with the Friday afterwards. Please be prepared with both chapters. Read them in English, know them very well, inshallah. Okay. And then after that, we'll get into 111, 106, inshallah, 108. Those will be short and quick, inshallah. These first, 20 chapters of the Quran. This is the first phase of the Meccan period. So what we're going to do, imagine now that you are part of the early community of believers around the Prophet ﷺ. It's just you and a couple other simple people, right? Some person named Abu Bakr that you just met, you're having tea with, okay? Some lady that invited you to her house. Her name is Khadija. You know she has a lot of money, okay? There's a little kid running around. His name is Ali. He's getting into all kinds of stuff. There's another little guy serving you tea. His name is Zayd, okay? And there's other little children around as well. Hind and another little kid named Hind and some other little kids as well. They belong to Khadija also. And there's a couple of people. There's this little black dude out there. His name is Bilal. He's getting in a lot of trouble. He's being tortured all the time because he keeps talking about one God, a strange concept, which you yourself are now wondering what you got yourself into. Okay? So now we want to discover how these things unfold. What is the Quran trying to do with this early community, and what kind of way is it trying to pave with this community here? This is the early Meccan period, so we want to look at it like this. Now, finally, last thing, and then we'll end. Two things. There is a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the actual order of the Quran that we have today, is not like this at all. Right? The first chapter in the Quran does not begin with Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. The first chapter in the Quran after the Fatiha, well, first of all, it is the Fatiha, and then after that is Baqarah. It's a Medinan chapter. So the historical development of the Quran was not the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the later community to have it. Okay? We are going against the grain. This is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the Prophet to arrange the Quran, the way it is now. Surah Al-Fatiha, then Baqarah, then Ali Imran, etc. Okay? To read it like this, the way we're reading it, is to take ourselves on a trip. Okay? And to also envision and understand the growth and the development of the early community, because what I want to focus on this class, the heart and the kernel that I want us to come out with, is that we want to emphasize we want to understand the Quran the exact same way as much as we can as the early community did. So when it comes to commentaries, I'm going to be giving you commentaries from the Sahabas. Okay, we're going to be, in terms of the tafseer that we'll be working from, we'll be drawing heavily on Tabari. And the advantage of Tabari is, one, he's the oldest mufassir, oldest scholar of tafsir we have. But two, he's got the recorded transmissions of all of the major companions regarding every single verse. We want that understanding as best as we can. And we want certain terms, we want to highlight certain terms, and highlight certain events, and highlight certain phrases that come out to us. And then put those things, this is the ta'wil part, in conversation with related competing concepts of today. Okay? So some verses we'll read quickly, give a tafsir and move on. Other verses we'll go slow and take our time, because they have concepts in them that are very, very, very powerful for us that we have to understand. Okay, inshallah. So we need to stop now. This building, as you know, closes at 9 p.m. They shut the doors. Is the time okay for you guys? 6:30 to 8 p.m. Is that okay? Or do you want to go like from 6:45 to 8:15, as we know Maghrib is at 8:30? Is half an hour of a break too much? 15 minutes enough time to give people, since we have a Jamaat here, the fear is that everybody will get up and go home and 2 people will be here for Maghrib.
During Ramadan, it'd be better to keep it for.
Huh?
During Ramadan, it'd be better to end it right as we're ready.
Right. Is 6:30 a problem for anyone? 6:45. 6:45 to like 8:15, give or take. Okay, inshallah. Tayyib. Okay, any questions before we conclude?
Would it be live stream?
It's going to be, I can't talk about that.
No, it's not live stream, but it'll be up on YouTube, inshallah, by tomorrow morning.
Like all the time, like 2 days, 1 day after.
Mm-hmm.
Can you email everybody and myself, or text me the link as well, because there's some people that would like the link that I know.
I have your email, I'll send it to
Send
you
it to
and
me.
we can send it to everyone,
Okay,
inshallah.
barakallahu feek. Okay.
Is there an email list or something like
For this class?
Yeah.
If you have registration.
You register.
There's registration for it. Yeah, you register for it, yeah.
You just remember the title we're going to recommend every week.
Thank you, I forgot. This is the book, Etiquette with the Quran. Etiquette with the Quran. I'll pass it around if you want to see it. It's Musa Ferber, M-U-S-A, last name F-E-R-B-E-R. Musa Ferber. Etiquette with the Quran, this is a translation of a very good classical work called Tibyan. It's written by Imam Nawawi. So this is the Tibyan, very famous book on the etiquette of the Quran written by Imam Nawawi, the same scholar that compiled the 40 Hadith. And this is the translation of this book. It's an excellent translation. I know the translator personally. And so I highly recommend this work. It's published by Starlatch Press. So if you go to starlatch.com, you'll find it.
Who's the author again?
The author is Imam Nawawi, but the translator is Musa Ferber, F-U-R-B-E-R. I'm sorry, I said F-E-R first. F-U-R-B-E-R, Musa Ferber. Etiquette with the Quran. I'd like for all of you, if you can, to get this book and read it very well. It's very important for your growth and development as reciters of the Quran, and more importantly, carriers. That's the proper term. Carriers of the Quran. Inshallah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.